until the railway came through in 1887, most of their goods had to be transported by boat, and they'd have to set off very early in the morning, as you can imagine. It was a very slow trip to go by. It was probably a slower trip to go by road because the roads were so badly formed.
And the end of the line was just inside the fence line at Paxton Street, down, just a little west of Shaw Street, Little Shaw Street, that part of it was known in those days. Yeah, well, the RSL area recently, that area there was a shopping complex down in Shaw Street down there. Of course, that was the name, Cleveland, the Central.
It was the centre for the district, and everything was round Cleveland Central Railway Station. Pretty well every train that came in, I think the policeman met the train, just to have a look and see who was on it. And it ran to a station master and at least one porter. So they had two engine sheds, as I remember, for the steam trains. And Bill Fountain, he drove one of them. And Mr. Rogers, who lived at Raby Bay, was the fireman. And at I think about 6, my dad got Bill Fountain to take me on the steam engine to Manly and back again, and the poor chap nearly got the sack because he was good, I believe. But it was a great thrill in my life.
The steam train would stay here all day, or stay at Cleveland, go up, turn the engine, and it'd stay there all day, and then leave here at 5:30 on the Sunday, taking the day trippers, the fishermen, the drunks. In 1927 they introduced AEC rail motors. Well, they really started to take over from the steam train. I would say after 1929 we had all rail motor services here, other than the odd special workers' trains, and there'd be a steam train came down midday on the Sunday.
Yes, the rail motor was still in action in those days, in the 1950s. The rail motor was used extensively till the railway line was closed in about 1962, 63.
At one stage, Cleveland had a station mistress, but I think a lot of that moved out in that 1929 change, sort of around about that time. There seemed to be a great change in rail right throughout Queensland.
Yes, it was probably quite a lot, because you had fettlers that had to look after the line. You had at least 2 sets of guards, drivers, porters, firemen, all that sort of thing. So yes, there were quite a few there, and that was here at Cleveland.
Sometimes in the afternoon, we disobeyed our mother by getting a ride on Mr. Baker, who was a fettler on the railway, and often he'd be coming home when we were coming home from school, and he'd ask us if we want to ride on his trolley, which of course we loved it. Yes. But we'd been told very specifically by my mother not to do it. It was the wrong thing to do. But we used to do it. She was always too busy in the shop anyway to know a lot of what we did. Mr. Baker had a magpie that used to talk. It used to say, it must have lived near a church at some time because it used to announce the hymn number 44. Oh, it had a couple of sayings which were quite cute, but we thought he was a lovely bird. We loved him.
Well, in the end, slowly, you know, things moved away from the rail.
Instead of having to go to the train and be unloaded, loaded onto a truck and taken to the station, unloaded into the truck and then taken somewhere else and then unloaded onto something else, and they just put them on trucks and they went straight in.
It was like many other suburban lines in Brisbane too. It just wasn't paying, and they must have looked around to see which ones they could close down, and they picked on the Manly or later to Cleveland line and closed it down.
It was officially closed on the 1st of the 11th, 1960.
It affected the farmers a lot because they had to all get everything up by motor transport then. You know, by motor transport all up to the markets and that. And I don't think a lot of the farmers weren't too happy about it.
And then once again Dick Wood, the Railways Department, wanted to sell off the corridor for the rail. And I will remember Dick Wood saying, "Over my dead body." That was one of his favourite sayings when he really meant something. And I would have heard him say that 1,000 times. And particularly over the railway. And because the railway believed that it was waste of time extending the railway to Thornside and on to Cleveland. This is how narrow-minded they were. They could never see that we get this great population in Redlands Shire. They thought it was just a bush-hick town. But Dick Wood and later on myself, we made very sure that the land was preserved for this for the railway to go through, and that's exactly what happened. If we'd have let the corridor go, which the government and the railway department wanted to do at the time, you wouldn't have a rail there. As simple as that.
E.G. Wood, he more or less took it up with the government there, not to sell the land up, and it seems as though the government told him, "Well, if you don't want the land sold up, the council better buy the fencing," which they did. And so they kept the land.
A Minister for Rail was advised by his senior people that the railway would be a failure, and you'd only carry the same number of people a bit further, because just explaining that, quite a number of people who lived in Thornside, Birkdale, they would go to the railway station at Manly. They'd catch the train at Manly, and the railway department said, "Well, that's the way it would be. If we take the train to Cleveland, it'll just be the same people, and you won't get any more people." But they've been proved absolutely wrong.
In stages. They went to Thornlands first, then they extended it to Wellington Point, and then they extended it to Cleveland. Of course, came the great day, as I said, and we all could have our first ride back to Cleveland on an electric train. I went down to Manly Station and I tried to buy ticket number 1 to Cleveland when it was reopened. And they had somebody in the Railway Historical Society, they had made a phone call or something, and one of them got ticket number. I had to be satisfied with ticket number 2. When the first electric train returned to Cleveland, I was determined I was going to be the first person into Cleveland on that first train. So I got up early when the day it happened. I got on the train at Manly and went up to Central Station in Brisbane, found out where the train would be coming through, the one that was going to Cleveland. and I got on into carriage number 1, right behind the driver, and I sat down. There were 4 seats available, so I sat down in the one right near the door that went into the driver's cabin, and 3 other people had the same idea in mind. When we approached Cleveland, I stood up and I went and stood in this little alcove where the door then opened into the driver. So I was just that little bit ahead of those other 3 people on the first carry, and so I can claim that I was the first person back into Cleveland when the train returned. Everybody would agree that the return of the train was a marvellous thing.